Here at Queen's Park, the word sweeping often gets overused in describing legislation, but in the case of Bill 5, sweeping is just the word for it. It would give the government unprecedented power to create special economic zones where companies could be exempt from complying with provincial laws. It would scrap Ontario's Endangered Species Act, replacing it with what environmentalists say is a watered-down version. In total, this one bill would amend 7 existing laws and create 2 new ones. There's a lot going on in Bill 5. I'll break it down for you.
We don't need their cars, we don't need their lumber, we don't need their energy, we don't need anything.
Donald Trump is why Premier Doug Ford says Ontario needs this bill.
The people of this province gave us a huge mandate to move forward, to compete against President Trump. He has called an economic war. He wants to take our jobs. He wants to close our businesses.
Trump's tariffs dominated both the provincial election won by Ford's Progressive Conservatives and the federal election won by Mark Carney's Liberals, and both promised to speed up approvals of major resource projects as a way of fighting tariffs.
We can't build Canada into an energy superpower if we can't actually get the shovels into the ground.
Everything is going to go faster. We're going to make sure we cut out the red tape and the regulations and the bureaucracy, and we're going to get shovels in the ground.
Ford's solution for making things happen faster is Bill 5. The single biggest thing that Cabinet gets out of Bill 5 is the power to create special economic zones. No other Canadian province has legislation like this on the books. I asked the government to name some jurisdictions that do. Here's the list they gave me. Bill 5 would give Cabinet the authority to declare any location in Ontario to be a special economic zone. And then Cabinet can give any company or project in that zone exemptions from any provincial law, provincial regulation, or municipal bylaw. What could that mean? Maybe an exemption from the Human Rights Code, no environmental protection laws, no need to comply with workplace safety rules, no limits on noise.
You can call them special economic zones, but what we know you are doing is opening up the floodgates for an abuse of power by government.
I was crystal clear about getting rid of the red tape, getting rid of the regulations, making sure that we attract investments and create the climate and the conditions for companies to come from around the world to invest.
Ford has already signaled 2 projects that could be candidates for special economic zones: the Ring of Fire mining deposit in northern Ontario and the proposed Highway 401 tunnel through Toronto. There would be nothing stopping the government from giving more places this special status, perhaps the massive Volkswagen EV battery plant near St. Thomas, or maybe the proposed Bruce nuclear power plant expansion.
So essentially, the Cabinet could give corporations a free pass to circumvent all sorts of important protections, such as environmental laws, labor laws, health and safety laws, local planning laws, municipal zoning bylaws, and so on and so forth.
Bill 5 doesn't lay out any criteria of how companies or projects would qualify for a special economic zone. It leaves it all up to Cabinet. And it's worth noting that during the election campaign, Ford never mentioned special economic zones as a tactic that he had planned. Bill 5 would repeal Ontario's Endangered Species Act and replace it with an entirely new law called the Species Conservation Act. The government says the current approach to protecting species at risk is too complicated, too slow, and causes unnecessary costs for projects such as housing and highways. Right now in Ontario, an independent scientific committee decides whether a species is endangered or threatened in this province. One of the key changes in Bill 5 would give Cabinet the power to overrule that committee.
It's really hard, I think, for Ontarians to have faith in the process going forward of identifying and classifying endangered species in Ontario if that's now subject to a partisan political process instead of an independent scientific process.
Bill 5 also has a section devoted entirely to mining. The government says it currently takes about 4 years for a new mine to get all necessary provincial approvals. The bill would shorten that timeline to 2 years.
Because we are among the slowest nations on earth when it comes to mining. We are the 10th out of 10th to attract investment. We are the second slowest in the OECD, the industrialized world.
Mining is worth some $16 billion a year to the provincial economy. Global demand is surging for what are known as critical minerals used in tech, such as cobalt, copper, lithium, and nickel. The Ford government wants to boost production in Ontario. Bill 5 would also greenlight a landfill at the edge of the town of Dresden in southwestern Ontario without an environmental assessment. You might wonder what a landfill has to do with protecting the economy against Donald Trump. Well, the government says it's because 40% of the waste generated by Ontario businesses gets shipped to landfills in the U.S., and the president could stop the flow of trash across the border at any time. The landfill's opponents aren't buying it.
If a massive landfill can be forced on the edge of our town without full environmental review, whose town is next?
The strongest objections to Bill 5 are coming from First Nations leaders.
The path that's underway now under this legislation is the wrong way.
Why are the mining sector's interests being protected over First Nations?
When this bill becomes law, that this will not be the end of our fight, that the fight will just start, will only begin.
More than a month after introducing the bill, the government added a couple of clauses to say the legislation will be consistent with Indigenous and treaty rights.
That's not good enough. It's a slap in the face when you try to do last-minute changes to appease the First Nations.
Under no circumstances will we compromise treaty rights, Madam Speaker, or the duty to consult. In fact, it will be a sharpened focus with First Nations who've approached us, Madam Speaker, about some of their economic interests.
If the Ford government pushes through with Bill 5, First Nations leaders are warning of the potential for conflict. They're talking of a repeat of the Idle No More protests against Stephen Harper's federal government, which saw blockades of rail lines and highways. Bill 5 could become law by the time the legislature takes its break for the summer in early June. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
Yeah, this is a little bit unstable down in here, that's for sure.
Glenn Beer walks the trails right next to his Midhurst property on a recent rainy afternoon. In April, after an ice storm and an extended period of heavy rain, he says water came pummeling down.
The water coming down through here was just like Niagara Falls. They pumped out a pond that was 400 feet by 200, let's say, 8 feet deep.
His longtime neighbor, Dan Caw, captured some of the aftermath. A sludgy, sandy mess that he says damaged the trail and Beer's property.
The water running beside my neighbor's house was outrageous. Like, it literally was washing out the trail, and it's never done that before.
The apparent source of that water, a new development under construction called Midhurst Heights down the street, where runoff is collected in a pond, then pumped out when it's full. The original plan by the developer called for that water to be pumped north 4 kilometers to a creek. But Beer recently learned the township approved a plan that would see some of the storm outfall pumped here, the ravine right next to his property.
Nobody had said anything really all the way along. The township really didn't talk to me about it. The developer really didn't talk to me about it. And they changed the original plan.
Hello? The change of plan more than a nuisance. Glenn's wife says the damage and possibility of more water has forced her to shutter most of their riding business, which they've run for 30 years.
I've stopped everything because it's just not feasible.
Penny says in one instance, a horse sunk to its knees in the unstable ground. For the safety of riders, the horses, and for liability reasons, she says they can't continue training horses.
We've lost that aspect of being able to have others come in and utilize the property because it's not ethical. It's not ethical to say, yeah, go use the trails and have someone get hurt.
The Beers, not the only area residents worried about the modified plan. Some living in a nearby subdivision say they've already had flooding issues before this development started.
It's straight level right with our house from where the culvert is. And so I think that our biggest concern is where's the water going to go?
Finding answers as to why the township approved the diversion of water onto the trail near Beer's property is proving difficult. Over the span of a week, we reached out to the township of Springwater requesting an interview. Instead, we were told no one was available due to scheduling and current priorities. They also didn't answer any of our questions by email. No one from the developer, Rose Corps, responded to CBC's calls or emails.
I just want to know, who do I send the bill to fix the repairs that are needed?
After Glenbeer raised the issue at council, it's now directed staff to report back on the history of the project and address these concerns. But for now, the Beers say the future of its business remains in jeopardy.
I get that we need subdivisions. We don't want to be difficult. There's got to be a way to communicate and have a better plan than this.
Farah Morali, CBC News.